Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our POWAN very first C++ programming bootcamp. This is week 2, and we'll talk about strings some more and talk about some string functions and just a lot of cool things you can do with strings. And we'll also talk about string comparisons, to name a few. Okay, so let's get started. So this is a cool little example here about adding strings. So this isn't necessarily like adding what we do in math where we have 5 plus 5 added up to give us 10. So when we're talking about adding strings, we're talking about almost gluing them together, just putting them right next to each other, just squishing them together. So in order to use the string data type, we always need that hashtag include string. So that is our string header, which has to be included at the top of the program. And you'll also need using namespace std to make sure that the short name string is there, which makes it a lot easier where you can simply do string str2 is world. Otherwise, there's just this other really complicated way you have to work with strings, and it deals with having to put 2 colons and std, something like this, in front every time. But just for ease sake, you always want to have using namespace std there. That just helps us a lot. So we won't have to write every line like this. So you don't have to think too much about that right now. Just know we need to add that header of that string library, and we need using namespace standard. So we have string str1, which is hello, and string str2, which is world. So we declare and initialized it all to that specific string value. So you can notice here we didn't have to write multiple different steps. We didn't do string str1 semicolon, and then we didn't do str1 equals hello semicolon on 2 different lines. We all combined them into one line, which is something we talked about last time. So we can do this. It's just simply making that variable in that string data type, and we're making that value either hello or world. So then we have just another string str3, which is not really declared with any specific type or with any specific value. We don't have equals anything there, so it's null. And then we have int len, which refers to our length. The main thing I want to show you is that you can actually copy a string onto another string. So we had str3, which had nothing there. But now we copied the contents of str1, which is hello. And we basically just made a copy. It doesn't do anything to str1. That still remains the same. The main thing that's changing is all of its contents are being copied over into str3. So it's just str3 is literally whatever is in str1 now. And when you see out that, you'll actually see that it's going to print out hello. So that is really helpful. But now we have str3 equals again. So regardless of what is on the side, we're updating the new str3 value. So over here, we updated this value to be hello, but now we're updating it to whatever this is. So we call this concatenation, which is basically like what I talked about earlier, where you're adding and gluing the strings together. We're squishing it together. So our string 1 plus string 2. Remember, string 1 and string 2 were not changed or updated at all. They're still the same. So we're just putting hello and world and concatenating it. So hello world gets printed out. And actually, there's a little typo here. It should be world. But the main thing to note is that there's no space here. There's nothing there. Just the 2 words are being glued together. And that gets printed out. This specific thing gets printed out. And remember, since it's an end L, hello world would be on its own line. But the main thing to note is that we're gluing the 2 strings together by using the plus sign. And this is where we're adding them together. Not necessarily like what we do in math, but this is something a little different. And strings have multiple different functions that we'll actually talk about in a little bit. But the main thing to note here is that you can actually find the length of a specific string because that's one of the functions. So here we update our length value, which is len, and remember we can only take int values. And then we have str3.size and parentheses and semicolon. And this is the way we call the size pre-built string function. So this is already pre-built. We don't have to do anything to it. And this will print out the size of the string. You might be thinking, okay, what's the size? Well, you can also call it the length. And actually, this word size can be interchangeably used with .length. And just because they're both just getting us the length of all of the characters in that string. So we'll talk about the breakdown of what a string is, but the main thing to note here is that this is just one of the many functions that we can call and use to work with strings. So that's a little bit about adding strings, and hopefully that part helped. Now let's talk about strings in more depth. So one of the most helpful data types is actually the string because it allows us to store a sequence of letters and other characters. Like we can store hello, or we can store I love pizza exclamation mark also as a string. So we can have multiple different spaces there. We can do so much with strings specifically. And just like these other data types we have, to create a string, we need to first declare it. And then we can store a value on it. So right here we have string full name equals first name plus last name. So this is an example of concatenation, which was what we just talked about. And another way to glue these two strings together is using the append function. So again, this is another function where you put the first string and you put the second string there, and both of them will just be glued together, similar to what we just saw in the last slide. So you do get an error if you try to add a string with an int. It's just like you're adding apples and pears. That's just not going to work. And then another thing to remember is you can call it the length function or size function. You can call either one of these. They both do the job of getting the length from the variable. And in this case, we have our variable called str. So the main thing to know is the length or the size function. They're just pretty much the same things. And they're one of the many examples of string functions that exist. So to call any string function, we have to have the string name, which is just a variable name, which is just a variable name. And you need to have it followed by a period. By the function, it can be either length or size. They both do the job. And parentheses and the semicolon. Remember, a semicolon is like a period. You always need to have it there at the end to conclude the line of code. So let's do a quick little example of length and size, just to start us off. So the first thing we are going to do in this demo is to just go over what the length or the size of the string would be just ourselves, and then we can print it out using the string functions that are already built for us. So let's just see, there are 3 characters here because it's A, B, C. So that is why our string first's length is going to be 3. And remember, length and size correspond to the same thing. And then now let's take a look at string second. So string second has 1, 2, 3, 4 characters. That is why the length and the size would be 4. And just another thing to remember is that strings are built in a way where they have indexes. So an index or position. And this is basically helping us find, let me just really quickly find let me just really quickly edit this sentence and then I'll talk. So it helps us find what is the value at that specific position. So when you have the index or position, it just tells you what is the value at that specific point. So every string starts with position 0 and it ends with the length or size minus 1. So we use the length function to get the length of the string, and we subtract it by 1 to get the very last index. So this is basically the first to last index. And we can play around with that more, and I'll go more in depth. And I actually have a really neat image that I want to show you guys right after this cool little demo. So first things first, we manually computed this in our brains, just trying to figure out the length and string. Now let's try to just do it using our knowledge. So let's see out a statement that says the length slash size of the string, and let's just always put the string name. So of the string first. And then we can put is, and then a semicolon referring to first dot length. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use an end-l. So the 2 lines that we're about to make are just on separate lines. Just want it to look cleaner. Then I'm going to copy this statement and I'm going to do the same, but this time for our string second. So I'm going to move this all there. So we have string 4 and string second. So of the string second, or actually just to make it easier, I can just say of the first string and the second string. You just want to always think about how your users will understand each and every statement. You don't want it to be too complicated. So of the first string is that length, and then we always have to change this to the second length. So let's go ahead and try that. Okay, so as you can see, right now, nothing really took place. That's because it just takes time to load. But if it ever does take too long to load, you can always refresh or just wait until that dot/main pops up. And then you'll know that your lines have been executed. Sometimes if you have too many tabs open or too many windows open, like I do, it's always great to just close them off, and that'll speed up the process. Okay, so the length or size of the first string is 3, length or size of the second string is 4. That accurately corrected that. You might be wondering, would it do that if you just use size? Would it still be the same? Well, the answer is it should be. It should be exactly the same. So see, when you did that, it still did 3 and 4 being outputted. So that's pretty much it for that demo. But we'll talk about some other important things you can use as well to help out with doing multiple different operations. We're going to do something called getLine right now, actually. So we've gone over scenarios where strings are taken in from the user input. So I'm just going to do a brief review of cin, so character n. So I'm going to take in our first variable's value, but remember, you always have to declare it first because everything is line by line in C++. Right now, the compiler doesn't know what first is, even though you declared it here. So you always have to move that up. So I moved that there. And even though I did string first is ABC, when I take in the, when I do cin first again, it'll take in a new first value. So it will be updated, a new string value for the first variable. I'll show that in a second. So I'll just really quickly comment this out so we can focus on one thing at a time. So if I see out what first is now and what first will be at the end, you can accurately compare and contrast and figure out what we're doing. So right now we have ABC, which is just a normal way to do that. And now we're going to see in first. So I'm going to see in the dog, but remember, since it's C and it's only going to stop after the space, so it'll probably just say the. Exactly. So the gets updated as first. Now you might be wondering, what can you do to have your string have spaces and all that? Well, you can directly change this to have ABC are the first 3 letters of the alphabet. So when you see out that, the entire thing will be C outed. So you can either directly do that, but with C in, you can only do values and you can only add values up until the compiler sees a space. So to get around that, we use something called getLine. So getLine, and we're still using the cin operation, the cin stream. And what we're going to do is we're going to get our user input and store it in the first variable. So I'm going to comment this out. And what we're going to do is we're going to see out first endl. So this is the first see out statement. The first thing that's going to be printed should be this. The second thing that's going to be printed can include spaces and anything we want. So let's go ahead and try that out. Okay, perfect. That first thing gets printed. Now we have see out first and then endl. That's just exactly what's being printed there. After that, we have getLine cin first. So I'm going to get the line of whatever the user inputs from the keyboard. So right now I'll put, I love pizza and an exclamation mark. All of this should be stored in first now after I return or enter. And exactly that is what happens. So when I see out first, you can tell that first became updated with the new value, because whenever we work with C++, we work with things that go line by line. The compiler executes every single line of code, well, exactly in sequential order. So it'll go line by line. Well, that's pretty much it for this part. I'm glad you guys got some experience with getLine. That is a very important thing to know. And an important thing to know is just the size and length function. And we're going to go over this and what the index and position means as well. So let's go back to our presentation. So we just talked about this. Okay, so every string has multiple different characters in it. And our index, or we also call it the position, always starts at 0. And we always end at our length minus 1. So let's calculate that right now. The word hello, it has the length 5, right? Because it has 5 characters. And the last index is length minus 1. So 5 minus 1 is truly 4. So we can calculate that this is correct. And every single thing has its address as well, but we're not going to deal with that. The main thing you need to know is that indexes are used to manipulate our variable values at that specific position. Like I can change hello to be yellow. I can actually go and change this little character to be a Y. So it's a really cool thing we're going to try right now, actually. So let's go into this next slide, which goes and describes how to access these strings and these specific characters. So you can access individual characters by using square brackets. And if it's array or anything, that's just the way to go using these square brackets. However, you can also use something called the at function, which is basically dot at, and then you put the index value to get the character at that position. But we use it much less often. I will show you both ways to access these individual characters. So we can actually change the value of the strings, which is something I mentioned earlier. So we know 0 is the first character, 1 is the second, so on and so forth. And you can change these values of the strings by manually changing each and every index value, like so. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at an example where someone accidentally misspelled a specific word. So I'm going to take a word, and we'll actually comment this out so you guys can take a look at it later. And I'll move all this down, but I'll keep these notes there since they are helpful. Okay, so first things first, we want to use getLine. So first, let's declare this variable called word, and it's a string. And we're going to access individual characters here. So I'm going to use getLine to get the user input. Okay, getLine cn word. Now, I'm going to check and edit the misspelled words. So first things first, let's check if this works properly. Remember, we do incremental programming. We don't just code everything at once and then submit it. I mean, if it's a really small program, then you can just code it all at once. So we're going to get this word in, and it's hello world, but instead of world, I'll just put whirl. So obviously world is spelled wrong. And right now it's not checking for anything. What we just did is used getLine. Okay, perfect. We didn't do anything. We didn't even use a C out. We just were making sure that this part at least works. Okay, so we use getLine to get that word. Now we can go into more detail where we can actually print out the word so we know what the error is. So I'm printing out the word right now. Instead of, we'll just use the same example where we misspelled world. Okay. Okay, perfect. We know the cout works. Now let's go and individually figure out what index is that last L at, so we can manually edit it. So hello and whirl with an exclamation mark is our exact string. So this below thing is just referring to our string word. Okay, so the H is at position 0, the E is at position 1, the L is at position 2, the second L position 3, 4, and that space is at position 5. And then 6, 7, 8, 9. And then that last L is at position 10. So what I'm going to do is I'll just put a little comma right here, or a little indicator for us that this is the 10th index, this L, and we want to edit that. And then obviously the exclamation mark is at the 11th. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and say word at index 10 is going to be changed to have a D there instead of an L. Let's see if we did this right. Again, let's just use the same example we've been using. And usually I don't use getLine with these types of scenarios. I just really wanted you guys to have experience with learning getLine because we only talked about it once today. So hello world. Okay. Well, you might be thinking, okay, well, we just saw hello world got printed out. We haven't been able to see the new updated values. Well, we can actually put another cout word just to see if it worked. Multiple cout statements are really helpful with finding our edits and making sure everything works as intended. So as we can see, the L got changed to a D. Let's take a look at an easier example now. So let's have a word, and in this case, let's just directly say this word is dog. But let's just misspell it and let's say dawn. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I can use 3 ways of editing this, or actually 2 main ways of editing this. So the first thing I can do is just say, okay, this is at index 0, 1, 2. So N is at index 2. So I can edit that directly by doing word 2 is G. Remember, we're trying to change dawn to dog, and that is one major way of getting that done. Let's go ahead and test that out. But of course, you want to see out dog just to see if that works. So word, perfect. Now dog should be executed. Perfect. So we were able to manually edit that. Let's do another example. Let's go ahead and say that we didn't want to use this way. Well, there is another way we can use this, where we can change the word dawn to dog. If you noticed, the N is the last character, and we know that the last character is always length -1 or size -1. Let's just say this had a bazillion or like 1,000 little characters there in that string. You don't want to count every single one of them. So what you can do is you can simply say, okay, I just want to change that last letter. Why not just say word at that specific index is G. Now notice we did not assign index to be anything, but we just said the last index is always length -1. So we can simply calculate that by doing a quick little calculation where we do length -1. But again, what are we finding the length of? Is it the length of like word? Is it the length of some other variable? We need to tell the compiler that, hey, we're finding the length of word, of the string word. So int index is word.length -1. This calculates that the last index is the one that we want to change to G, basically. So this is all doing that. Now let's do a quick cout statement. Okay. So as soon as you run that, sometimes it takes a while. Oh, there it is. We get dog. So that exactly works as intended. So these are the 2 ways of trying that out. And hopefully that shared a bit more about strings and indexes. I hope that makes more sense, and we can talk some more in our presentation. So we already talked about this and we did our little demo. Now let's talk about the various different operations and functions that exist. So we talked about getLine, which stores a stream of characters that are entered by the user in object memory. So cin stops until it reaches a space. GetLine, it can store as many things. It can store spaces, different characters, words. It only stops after you press enter. And pushback and popback are some other functions that exist, where pushback is used to input a character at the end of the string. Popback is used to delete the last character from the string. And we'll talk about some of these functions some more in depth, but the main thing to remember is that there are so many different string operations, like these as well, where you can find the length of the string, where you can find the capacity of the string, which we'll also take a look at. But the main thing to know, again, is there's so many different functions of strings. So in this little demo, the main thing to note is that you can calculate the function values by simply calling the function like dot resize 13, and then I'll resize the entire string to be 13. And again, you have the capacity there, string to fit. All of these are all called by the variable name, the period, and the function name, parentheses, and a semicolon. So this is a cool little demo. You can go more into depth, and that's that. And these are some more of those functions that swap strings, that copy them, that have begin or end. And this is really referring to iterators. So we really wanted to share all the different functions that are here, and we'll go more into depth into the major ones next time. But the main thing I want to share as well, which is a major takeaway of our class, is escape characters. So I don't know if you guys noticed, but specifically in all of our string examples, we haven't been able to print out things like quotation marks. Even though we use quotation marks to actually store the actual values of the string, there may be times where we want to actually print out the quotation mark to the user's screen. Like if you want to print out a quote from a famous author or anything, and that's part of your assignment, you want to print out double quotation marks. You use these escape characters, which are specially defined things in our programming language, which help us actually print these out. So these things won't be necessarily printed out, but we'll be putting this inside our quotation marks of our string to be able to make a new line, which is an alternative than using end L. Make a backspace, make a vertical tab, make a single quotation mark, make a double quotation mark, and make a backslash. So I'd like for you guys to play around with these and see all the cool things you can do. I'll just really quickly show you guys a cool little example. So, okay. The example we're going to do is what I talked about earlier, where we're trying to print out a quote to the screen. So this is a simple example. We have string phrase is equal to I love food. So this is what gets generally printed out, just I love food, right? These quotes will not get printed out. They're just used to store the string. So let's just see out this phrase so you guys know the before and after of the escape characters that we'll be using. So beforehand, oops, it's going to take some time. Okay, perfect. So I love food is getting printed out, but it doesn't say who's the author or who's or even if this is a quote, it just is a random line there. Let's go ahead and change this up. So we'll use a slash, and you can either use double quotation or single quotation, depending on what format you want it to be printed out. And I'm just going to use double quotation. And this is going to print out one side of the quotation marks. And I'm going to use the escape character again right here. So right now I have the string quotation mark in that dark red color, which is at the very end. And then in between, I have my escape characters right here. And that's pretty much it for that part. Okay, perfect. Now let's go ahead and see what we do, like when we try to add a different little phrase. So let's add continued phrase. So I love food. And let's go ahead and change this to a T. So we get a tab and then a little dash mark. And let's make this little quote by my name by Ankita. Let's see what happens. Well, what do you guys think is the error here? Why didn't what we wanted to print out not print out? I'll give you a hint. We did not actually print out continued phrase. We didn't actually see out it. I know it's a silly thing and it happens all the time. And that's why we're so thankful to the compilers for always giving us the ability to see what comes out to the screen. That's what I absolutely love about C++ and just programming in general. You can always test and see what went wrong. So we just see outed those phrases. So what we did here was we didn't use an endl, we didn't use anything. We just made a little tab, which is great. But what if I want this to be on a separate line? We want dash and keto to be on a separate time, and we also want it tabbed. So what I'm going to do for that is after we have that escape character for, just the quotation marks in general, this might be a little trippy, but I'm also going to add another escape character, this time for a new line. So the n, the /n will make a new line. Exactly what happened. We have a new line, and this time we got a tab because we wanted this to be tabbed. So this is the power of escape characters. They're really, really neat and really, really helpful. So this is a neat little example that I like to show when I'm teaching this. Okay. So another main thing to note is that you always need to put these escape characters in between the main string quotation marks that store the actual string. We cannot put these escape characters outside of those quotation marks. And these quotation marks are just for the compiler to know, hey, you're printing out a string right now. So this is all printing out a string. Okay, and that's pretty much it for this one. And if we needed to compare two strings, this is a little example of a function that you can use, which is strcmp. You can always just go and take a look at all of these library functions that exist, and we'll talk more about some examples of those. And again, you see the new line being utilized here as an escape character. And you have our if-else statements, and we'll talk about those equal signs in a little bit as well. Right now, let's do a holistic string demo and review. So we're going to compare two strings, and you can compare these two strings for equality using the two equal signs, which represent the fact that you're checking for both sides to be equal, both contents of the strings to be equal. And you can use these for ints or any data type. So these equal sign and these not equal sign operators, they are very helpful when you're trying to do calculations and when you're trying to test things out. So this not equal to operator tests exactly what it sounds like. It tests whether or not that specific string and the other string on the other side of this operator is not equal to each other. And we're going to check if an int is even or odd. We're going to use modulo division to do that. And we're going to check if a number is divisible by 15. If so, we're going to use this. We're going to print out hello and a new line. So I'm going to give you guys a quick 2 seconds to just pause this video, and we will go into this demo right now as a holistic review of week 1 and a lot about week 2. Okay, let's try it out. Right now, let's compare two strings. So I have these two strings that I already made, phrase and continued phrase. But honestly, I'm just going to use an easier example just so it makes sense. I'll just say this is phrase 1, and this is phrase 2. So phrase 1 is going to have hello. Phrase 2 is going to have a small little edit where it has hello and a hashtag there and just random stuff there. So let's just print out those strings just so we know that it all works as intended. Yep, we didn't use any endel, that's why they're all glued together. Just to make it prettier, we can always add an endel there. Now, after doing that, they'll look much better. Exactly, even though that hello hashtag little phrase is definitely throwing my eyes off, but it's always good to just see a cool little comparison. So let's use an if statement just to see if those are equal. So if phrase 1 is equal to phrase 2, then I want us to print out equal. And if it's not equal, what we're going to do, we'll just use an else because there's only 2 scenarios here. If it is equal, if it's not equal, there's no mid ground for that sort of thing. And when you're testing for equality, you have to have 2 equal signs because 1 equal sign is used for assignment purposes. So let's just take a look at this example. So we're going to print out not equal because it truly is not equal. Oops, there you go. Let's go ahead and see if that worked. It should be not equal. Perfect. So we see our 2 strings and we can tell that they are not equal. Now you might want to check for a scenario where they are equal just to see if what we're doing is making sense. Yep, equal. Perfect. And there's a lot of way programmers program things. So if you have a different way of doing all of this, it's completely fine. As long as you achieve the main purpose and goal of checking if it's equal or not. Okay. Then the next thing is to check if an int is even or odd. So I'm going to leave those if statements there for a second, and I'm going to change our strings to equal int. So we'll just have int x is, let's just have an odd number first. So I'm going to say 3. Okay. And I'm going to just print out x. And remember, we are checking if it is odd first. So let's go ahead and edit these if and else statements to check if something is odd or even. So we have this x variable. And the main thing I wanted to do is to utilize this to see that the x is a odd value. So x is 3. And actually right now you might be wondering, why didn't I use getLine to get the user input? GetLine is used for strings. Cin is used for anything. So right now I can truly get the user input. That might be a better thing to do actually. And to get the user input, we just use cin. So cin x, and we're going to test out different things, and we'll obviously want to print out the x so we know what it is as well. So if our x has a remainder when it's divided by 2, you know that it is odd. So x mod 2 is equal to 0. It's odd. Let's break that down a little bit. So let's pretend there is a value of x being 7. 7 divided by 2 has a remainder of 1, right? Which is not equal to 0, which means it is even. Or 1 minute. Oh, sorry about that. I completely confused us with those little statements down there. But let's go back here. 7 divided by 2. Okay, that is 3 remainder 1. But that modulo captures that remainder, right? So 1 is not equal to 0. So this should actually be odd, and this should be even. So we had a little flip-flop situation back there. We are testing whether or not the remainder of x divided by 2 is equal to 0. And that is how you check if something is even, right? Or if it is odd. So if we did say that this is odd and this is even, we had to change this if statement to have the not equal sign. Before we do anything like that, I really want to show you guys how those get executed, and then we'll explain it a little bit more while we're doing this, because it can be a little mind-boggling at first. So we're going to take in the value 7, like we just said. So 7 is odd. That is absolutely correct. And the reason why it is because when you divide it by 2, there is a remainder, and it is not equal to 0. So that's why we skip this if statement, go right into the else, and execute that. Let's go ahead and try a scenario where it is equal to 0. So you know that 8 divided by 2 is equal to 4, and it has no remainder. So let's go ahead and see that, well, it truly is even. Now let's flip-flop these statements. Let's say we really wanted the cout statements to just remain the same. In that case, we're going to have to modify this if statement because it truly is wrong right now. It just flip-flopped. So we have to change this equal sign to a not equal sign. So this is saying if x mod 2 does not have a remainder value of 0, then you print out odd. Otherwise, you print out even. So let's just walk through that because it can be crazy. So 7 mod 2. 7 mod 2. What is that? That is equal to 1. And since 1 is not equal to 0, it's odd. It fully fulfills that if statement. Since 1 is not equal to 0, we know that this is odd. Now let's go back to that scenario where we do have it being an even number. So 8 mod 2 has a remainder of 0, right? Because it fully divides out, 8 divided by 2 is 4, there's a remainder of 0. So we know that 0 is not equal to 0. So this statement is false in that case. And that's why we print out this cout statement. It can be a little confusing at first, so I hope that helps. And when we try this out, it should work the exact same way we did by switching the equal sign and the cout statement. So it should work exactly the same. So 8 is even, right? Let's check 7. Perfect. Now we want to check if a number is divisible by 15. Then we want to print hello with a new line. So we use an escape character. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll take in a random x value from the user. So this can all still stay the same. And we want it to be divisible by 15. In that case, if it is divisible, then what we are going to do is print out, we'll go back here. So if it is divisible by 15, we print, I'll just really quickly grab this so we can take a look at this. So if this is divisible by 15, which of course means that we have to test for equality here. So if there's a remainder, there's no remainder, it's just 0, then we know it's fully divisible by 15, right? So we see out, oh, it did not actually copy. That's okay. Well, I'll just go ahead and copy it again because I really want for us to copy it. Okay. We want to print out a single quotation mark. Okay, so right now we have our general string there that's going to be printed out. So we're using an escape character, and we're using a single quotation mark. So a single quotation mark. And then we have hello, and we have a new line that is being printed out. So a new line is being printed out. And then we also want to end with another quotation mark. So let's go ahead and add that there. And then you can tell me, guys, what you think is a little weird about this scenario. So yeah, 15, mod 15 is equal to 0. We already know that. Okay, so here's the little strange part. We have a quotation there. We have hello there. And then we have the new line there. And then we have a single quotation there. Well, that is exactly what the user wanted. They wanted a new line there. And then they wanted the quotation mark there. Now, obviously, we know that probably the instruction was wrong. And you have to switch the quotation mark ending to be before the new line. Okay. And also we did an end L twice basically. So we did an end L right here after the hello and in between that last quotation mark, and then another end L right here before this little red asterisk. So we can delete this and we can go ahead and say there's probably an error. I'm going to make the quotation mark there first, and then I'm going to make the new line. It just looks weird if we follow what this says. So we have edited this to look better. We're using the escape character new line, and we're using a single quotation mark. And again, we're going to test where 15 is divisible. Perfect, it prints out hello. Now let's try an example where 15 is not divisible, just to see what would happen. And remember, we have no else statements or anything after that, so nothing would happen because it won't even go in this if statement. It completely ignores this. Yeah. And that is pretty much it for our string demo and review. I really hope this helped you guys, and thank you so much for watching.